Hi everyone, welcome to this new Capture One webinar. Thank you all for signing up and thanks to Wex for hosting us once again. Some of you might already know me, my name is María, I'm a trainer and channel manager at Capture One. We decided to bring you this new webinar because in the last session some of you were asking that it would be really useful to have a dedicated webinar only for workflow, so this is the objective of the session today. We're going to talk a lot about workflow and I'm going to show you different tools so you can establish your own workflow according to what suits your needs. This is for me really important because it doesn't really matter to me if you're mimicking my workflow or not. I think that everyone is different, so everyone needs a different way to do things that make sense for what they are doing and for how their mind works, kind of. So yeah, this is what we're going to be doing today. First of all, I wanted to remind you that we've got a summer promotion going on, and this is really special because we've got a 25% off in Capture One Pro, Sony and Nikon, and 30% off Fujifilm, Capture One Pro Fujifilm licenses. And of course, as always, I remind you that you can get all of your licenses at Wex. We have also someone from Wex supporting us on the chat. Hi, Matt. And I'm going to jump on to explain the session today. So, today we've got again around 60 minutes for the webinar, and in the end I will leave 15 minutes for questions and answers. Remember that this is a pre-recorded session, but I am right here on the chat with you to answer all of your questions as we go, or you can wait till the end as you want. The webinar will be recorded and it will be staying at Wex's YouTube channel, and of course you can enjoy the chat. So let's begin. First of all, I wanted to clarify how we're going to be doing this because there is a lot of information today. So I will start by explaining briefly the difference between sessions and catalogs, and then I will go on with explaining a session workflow. Then I will explain how to set up a proper catalog workflow. I will do some batch editing in the end, and then we got some export automation. So I will show you how to automate things a bit so it goes smoothly in the end. So let's start with the explanation of the difference between sessions and catalogs. So I believe I already mentioned this in the first webinar at Wex. If you haven't watched it, I recommend you to do so. But we're going to be going a bit more into detail today. So sessions is the native format from Capture One, and in order to understand what a session is really for, I like to think of how it started out, how Capture One started out. So Capture One started as a tethering software for the first digital bags, and back then the digital bags didn't have a preview, they didn't have a screen, so it was mandatory to tether to Capture One in order to see what was going on. And this is exactly the origin of sessions. So they are mostly thought for studio workflow or for project-based workflow like fashion, portraits, advertising, but it's really useful for many more workflows, as you will see in a moment. So it's thought in a way that you would create one session for each project. And when you're creating a session in Capture One, it will actually create a folder structure that we can take advantage of to organize our work. And the key point of the session, in my opinion, is to understand that in the session workflow, the files and the adjustments are kept together in the same place, okay? They will all stay in the same folder structure. On the other hand, we have the catalog workflow, which is more familiar probably to those of you who are coming from Adobe softwares. And the idea behind the catalogs is to have one file that will centralize many projects. So you wouldn't create a catalog for each project, but one catalog to have all of your projects there at hand. It's meant for large projects, also for wedding, travels, press, whatever is more related to report or large number of files per project. There is no folder structure, okay? It's all based in a virtual organization. And the idea in the catalog is that the files are kept somewhere, like in a hard drive, it can be external or local hard drive, and the adjustments are kept separately inside the catalog. Okay, these are the main differences between these two workflows. So now let's move on, and I'm going to start by explaining how to work with sessions and how a session actually works. So I'm going to jump on to the Capture One interface, which is right there, and I'm going to hide my camera for a while, and I will see you back in the end. So I wanted to start today to work from the scratch, so I'm going to create a new session so you can see what's happening all the way from the beginning. I'm going to click here on my new session, and this is what opens up. I have to give a name to my session, and this we have to think carefully before doing so, because if you will create a session for each of your projects, if you start to name things in the way that don't make much sense, you might have problems in the end with a folder containing many sessions that you don't really know what is what. So be mindful when you're giving names to your session. This is my personal recommendation. So this is not a very mindful name, but you've got the idea. So I'm going to import here some landscapes. So what I normally do is to, well, actually the date would go in the beginning, and I name my project just like this. So date inverted, today is 10th, and I'm recording this webinar. And then the name of the session itself. I would normally name it as the place where the pictures were taken, or the name of the project, something like that. So I'm going to keep it today on my desktop, so everything is at hand for the things I want to show you, but normally I would create this straight in an external hard drive, okay? I work at every project from an external hard drive because my idea behind this is that if my computer would catch on fire today, there is absolutely no problem. I don't have any information loss. Everything that is important, it's stored externally on a hard drive. And of course you need to be mindful also if you're going to work like this with the backup structure that you are creating. But this is my way to work. It doesn't have to be the one that suits you. Okay, so desktop for today. I created my session. Let's hit OK. And you can see instantly that a folder appeared right there. So even before we are moving on to the Capture One interface, let's see what happened. I'm going to come back here. This is my desktop. And this is the session that I just created. And you can see that Capture One already created a folder. If we go inside this folder, we can see different elements here. On one hand, we have the session file, which is this one here with the extension code session.db, but also Capture One created different folders. So we've got the capture folder, output, selects, and trash. This will be happening automatically every time that you are creating a new session. For now, all of these folders are empty, but that's going to change really soon. So I'm going to import some files and let's see what happens. I'm going back to my Capture One, hitting my import button, and I'm going to select my source. This is where my original files are stolen. So I would choose the folder. It was already that one, but I've got a folder here, files to import, some landscapes here, so I'm going to open this folder. And this is the files that I want to work with today. Also, we need to pay attention to the destination. So by default, it goes to the capture folder. And I recommend you leave it like that because we can take advantage of this folder structure that Capture One created to be organized with our own work. So I'm going to select to the capture folder, not a folder. I'm going to create nothing. I'm going to keep things simple. I could set also some backup options or some metadata. I'm not going to bother with that today, but you get the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and click import all. So these are my files showing up here. As you can see, they are not so raw. Let's just see the before and after. This is the before, this is the after, and there is actually already some adjustments here. And how can this happen? If you take a look at the extension here of the file, you can see that the extension is not a raw file extension, it's an EIP. This is a native file from Capture One, and it works like a kind of file zip package which includes the raw file and all of the adjustments. And this is really useful if you want to migrate some files from one session to the other like I just did here. These are adjusted because they are coming from my previous Capture One sessions and I just selected them for the webinar today, but they are already adjusted. And in order to create your own EIPs, it's just really simple. You just need to right click on the thumbnail and go with the option Export Originals, and then this dialog box will open up and you just need to click Pack as EIP. And then once you've exported an EIP, you can import that into any Capture One in any computer and all of your adjustments will be saved. Please keep in mind that the EIP format is native to Capture One and it won't open in other softwares, just for you to keep that in mind. But personally, I use EIPs a lot to, for example, for archiving purposes, because as I know that I'm going to be working with Capture One, always it's a really good way to keep the raw files and the adjustments without needing to export TIFF files. So I've got my files here. Let's see what happened with the source folder. I'm just going to go back here to my Finder, which is here, and everything is here in the capture folder as I told it to be. But what happened actually to the original files? If I come back to my desktop, here were my files to import, my landscapes, you can see that they didn't move from their place. So Capture One already actually duplicated the files and it copied all of these files into our capture folder. This is not bad. This is something that you need to keep in mind in order to not end up with thousands of duplicated raw files. But this is perfect, for example, when you are importing from an SD card, because normally you want all of your files to be imported into your computer, into your hard drive, and Capture One will automatically do this. It will duplicate the folders, the file, from your SD card into your hard drive, into your capture folder from your session folder. Okay, this is what's happening by default. Let's take a closer look at the other folders. We've got also an output folder, which is the default for the processed files, and some selects and trash folder. If we wanted, for example, to select this file, we can just, in Capture One, drag it here to our selects folder, right here in our session folders menu, and here it is. So it can be a way to tell to ourselves that this file is selected. And what happened in the Finder is that if I click here on the selects folder, look what happened here. This file actually moved in my computer, in my Finder, or in the Windows Explorer. It just works exactly the same way. So there is a correlation of what's happening in Capture One and what's happening in the computer. This is why I say that this is not a virtual organization, it's organization based in folders, okay? And also something else appeared here is this Capture One folder that we have here, and if we go inside of it, you can see that we have some cache files, some proxies, thumbnails, and some adjustments files too. So what to do with this folder? Don't touch it. Okay, just don't bother it, don't touch it, and of course don't delete it, because if you delete this folder you might ruin your editings by deleting the adjustments files, and we of course don't want to do this. So my personal opinion is just don't mind it, make as if it was not there. But then what happens if I take this file and I want to send it back to the capture folder? It's just back here, and it actually disappeared from the selects folder in Capture One, and here it is, it's back at our capture folder. And it works exactly the same way for everything. If I wanted, for example, to trash this file, I can just send it to my trash, and if I go here to my trash, here it is, okay? It works in the same way. So I find this folder structure very, very useful, and the good things about Sessions is that they make you be organized, okay? So you would end up in the way that in your hard drive you would have, like, I don't know, as many folders like this as projects you have per year, and it will be just very organized in the way that as the adjustments and the raw files and the exported files, everything is kept within this folder. It's really easy to locate anything that you might need from previous projects. I find it really, really useful, and I'm using this more and more every time. And for example, the output folder here is the default in the process recipes. If we take a look here, it's the output location by default, and I also suggest that you keep it like this. So another thing you need to know about Sessions is that they are not meant to work with a large number of files. So technically, as the Capture One support says, you shouldn't put more than 400 or 500 raw files into your capture folder, but this is a really conservative data in my opinion, because I did my own test, and the last crazy test I did, it was like 15,000 files, and I didn't realize significant performance changes. But okay, if you want to be a bit more conservative, something else that you can do is to use the session favorites. I'm going to explain you in a minute what they are. The thing is that within the session, you've got all of your files here in your capture folder, and you might want to use further organization in further folders, or you can just use the session albums as well. But let's say that you want to keep things separate in different folders. So I'm just going to create here within my capture folder. Let's say, for example, that this is from different days. So I'm going to create different folders for each one of the different days. Day 2 and day 3, for example. And I want to use these folders to catalog my projects. So I would come here to my Capture One, and here under the session folders and the session albums, we've got the session favorites as well. And these actually are just like shortcuts, so you can integrate other folders within your session. So I'm going to hit the plus icon here, and I'm going to my desktop, and it's here on my landscapes, capture, and I would just select these 3 folders and add that as my session favorites. So they are now empty, but just in the same way that I was dragging all of these files to the selects, for example, I can just drag this to my day 1 folder, and this will be going to day 2, for example. We can also change the order, and this would be, let's say, day 3, and they would be organized like that. The session albums, they work exactly just as the albums in the catalogs. They are virtual organization, so what you're doing between the albums is not affecting the actual location of the original files. let's make a test. For example, let's create an album. Let's call it just test to not mess up with more day 1, day 2, day 3. And just going to my day 1, and I'm dragging here to my album test. And if we go back to a finder, you can see that day 1 is still there, day 2, day 3, and it actually didn't move because I put it into the session albums. It's just virtual organization. And you can use this to organize all of your files within your session. You can divide it in session favorite folders, just like I did here. You can also work with albums and smart albums in virtual organization way. And I'm going to go deeper into the virtual organization possibilities in a moment when we talk about catalogs. And also, if I want to save this structure for my session, let's say that I want all of my sessions to already have this session favorites, so 3 folders inside of Capture, which are day 1, day 2, day 3, and this album called test, or let's say, for example, let's rename it to something relevant, for example, finals. And I want to keep my structure, so I can just go here to File and Save as Template. And this is going to save a session template that we can use for the next time that we create new sessions. So I'm going to call it day 1, 2, 3. It's by default saved in templates in the Capture One system folder. I suggest you leave it there. And let's just go ahead and save it. And the next time I want to create a new session, here on the templates, I can just select my day 1 to 3 template, and it will all have the same structure as here. And just one last thing regarding sessions that is really important is how to backup. So once again, I'm coming here to my Finder, and the good thing about sessions is that they are so easy to backup. Everything's here, everything is just a set of things that goes together. So in order to back this up, you just need to copy the whole session folder, not only the capture folder, because then you will lose the rest of the information, but you can just copy the whole session folder and everything that you need is here. You can even put it on an external hard drive, open it up in another computer with the same version of Capture One, and everything will be there and ready to go. So let's move on to how catalogs work. And in order to do that, I'm going to do it exactly in the same way, just going to create a new catalog. I'm going to call it, let's say, 2020. Normally I work with 1 catalog per year. You are welcome to do all the things that works for you. And normally I would also create it on my external hard drive where I'm keeping all of my work together, but for the same reason as the session today, I'm going to just leave it on my desktop. So I hit OK, and this is my new empty catalog. And even before importing anything here, I'm going to show you a very, very handy feature that you need to set up definitely if you're working with catalogs. It's up here on the preferences. You just go to General, and here you have the catalog backup option. Okay, this is really, really important to set it up, because what you're doing in a catalog, as I said before, is that all of your raw files are stored somewhere else, but all of your adjustments are inside of your catalog. So if that catalog got lost or corrupted or something like that, it's really important that you can get back all of your information, because in the catalog you can store crazy amounts of information and you don't want to lose that. So we've got a nice feature here in Capture One for a catalog backup, and it's just to remind us where to do this catalog backup and when. Normally I have it selected on always, but if that's too much for you, you can select once a day, once a week, once a month. I don't recommend you to go for never. So anyways, I have it on always, and you can also select where this catalog backup will be done. By default, it's on the application support folder in Mac or the system folder in Windows, but you can set that to any other location, like an external hard drive, something like that, a NAS drive, everything that would work for you. Anyways, do backup your catalogs because this is really important, and it just takes really a moment, because as the raw files are not stored inside the catalog, it's just backing up like previews, adjustment files and things like that. It's just very, very quick to do, and it doesn't take even 30 seconds. So I would suggest you do that before starting to work with the catalog. So let's just go ahead and take a closer look at the importing options for our catalog. Our source folder is actually the same as before. I will just import the same raw files, but I want you to take a closer look to the destination of these files. We have different options here, and different to the ones in the session. We have current location, inside catalog. This is one of the latest folders I selected that is just here by history. and choose folder option. Okay, so before going on, let me tell you one piece of advice. Never ever choose to store your raw files inside the catalog, okay? Because catalogs are just not meant for this. I don't think this is a really good option because it will get messy. You can't really access your raw files quickly. It will just get heavy and you can get some performance issues. So I do not recommend you to store your raw files inside the catalog. So let's just go ahead with the other two options, current location and choose folder. When to use which one of them? Okay, so let's say that you're importing from your SD card. Then in that case, you should use choose folder. And then what Capture One is going to do is just going to grab these files from your SD card and you can put them wherever you want, in your external hard drive, your local hard drive, wherever you want, wherever you are normally storing your raw files. And what Capture One is going to do is going to copy these files into the selected folder, and then the catalog will work only with the previews, okay? We're going to be working only with the previews. The previews will be stored inside the catalog with the rest of the adjustments, but the raw files are somewhere else. This is for SD cards. What if in my case, I'm importing raw files from other folders in my hard drive? Then in that case, I would choose current location. And what Capture One is going to do is that it's not going to copy or move these raw files anywhere else. It's just going to say, okay, this is the raw files, I'm going to create my previews, and I'm going to link them to the original files, okay? And in this way, we can have a very, very optimized catalog with only using the previews and not the original raw files stored inside the catalog. This is my recommendation. I could also do some backup what I'm importing to a different location from an SD card. I'm not going to bother today with that. I'm just going to go ahead and import it once again. So something happened here, my raw files appeared, and also some catalog collections were created. The catalog collections are created by default, okay? So we've got an all images collection, and we've got also the recent imports. And this is just created, as I said, by default, by itself, and normally I don't work so much within these collections because I prefer to create my own user collections. So one mistake that is really typical to new users of Capture One is that I get the question so many times like, hey, why all my files disappear from my catalog? And then the person just happened to be on the recent imports collection and he could see only the last 5 files that were imported. So I don't really like to use these collections, but just for you to know that they are there. And for example, if we wanted to select all of the images, then you could do it from here. So as we are working in a catalog, everything that we are doing is actually virtual organization. Okay, the raw files will never be moved from where they are stored, and we just work with the previews and we put them here and there, but the raw files are not moving from their place. And how we are going to do this? We have different ways to organize our work within the catalogs, and before doing anything like that, I would like you to stop and think before doing anything else. How do I want to organize my catalogs? And not only this one, for example, if you're going for one per year, I like to think, how would I like to organize my catalogs 10 years from now? Okay, just think to the future and think that in 2025, if you need to come back to your photos from 2020, you need to remember what you actually did, how your mind was working. So I suggest that you create some kind of catalog structure and that you respect it through the time and through the years. And in this way, you will have a very, very organized catalog that will be easy to navigate, easy to find whatever you need. Okay, I'm going to show you an example of how I do this, but it's my structure, is my organization. It doesn't have to work for you, but as I said in the beginning, I'm just going to give you the tools. So as soon as I'm going to close my catalog, I'm going to choose not now. I don't want to make a backup now, but I got here my list and I'm going to choose this catalog. This is one of my old catalogs and I want to use it as an example of how I organize my work. Because right now in 2020 I keep exactly the same structure or a very similar one. So let's come here. These are my user collections in my catalog. You can see that I have different kind of icons for different kind of user collections. We can work with albums and smart albums to organize our work, but there's also some other user collections that we can see here, which are the projects and the groups. These all have a concrete hierarchy, with the album being the lowest on the hierarchy. So for example, I just got here my album with some of the pictures inside, and I store this inside a group. And in a group I can just put different albums together because they have some correlation. So for example here, this is from the same trip, and I just have it here on a group called Bike Trips, for example. And then this group, in the same time, is stored within a project, okay? And projects are the place where groups can be stored and also albums can be stored. You can't just store images inside the project, but it's just meant to organize different collections. So this would be the hierarchy, the project being on top, then the group, and then the albums. And then of course we've got some smart albums. I'm going to talk about them in a moment because they can be really useful to automate or organization of the catalog. So I wanted you to take a closer look at how I'm naming my albums actually, and you can see that I use a structure that is very similar to how I name my sessions. So I use the date, the name of the project or the city or the place or whatever, and it's just meant to be in this way. And we can be very, very organized thanks to the user collections. Some other people like to use keywords. You can also do this in Capture One, of course. The keyword tool is right here on the metadata tool tab. And I don't have really a keyword library that is very set and organized. I tried to do this, but this didn't work for me. But of course, I know it works for many people, so you can just use the keywords to tag your photos, and then you can always use that with the filters as well. So let's talk about the filters now. I'm using both the user collections and the filters. So for example, here in this project, I have stars and I have color tags. And you can see that I'm using different kinds of color tags. Let's just see, for example. So I'm going to use, for example, this collection to show you different ways to use the star ratings and the color tags to organize your work. You can see here that I use both star rating and color tags. Let's talk about color tags first. We have different color tags here. I actually only use 4 of the colors, so let's see what happens here. The green tag is the color that I use to tell myself that these pictures are already edited and they are ready to be processed. Okay, so all of these images here, back then I said, okay, they are good to be exported. Then we've got the yellow one, and the yellow one is the color I use to tell myself that something still needs to be done with these pictures. I'm not finished to edit them. I don't have any red ones here, but I would use the red if I consider that any of these photos needs to go to Photoshop for further edit. This is not the case. And then I've got the purple one, which I use in all my catalogs as well, and this is like to mark the absolute best or my favorite photos from each of the projects. And then, for example, I have worked here with a smart album to just select the purple tags, and this would be the final for the whole year. And the star ratings, you can do this just in a very simple way. It's just like a classification of what works better for you or not, and you can also use these filters to select this work. Another interesting thing is that you can combine both the star rating with the filter. So for example, if I wanted to see only the 3 stars tagged purple, I can add the filter just by clicking Alt or Control in Windows, and then this would apply both of the filters. So I can only see here the 3-star rated and the purple tags. To use the star rating and the color tags would be, in my opinion, the simplest way to start working in a catalog, because it's just very intuitive, very simple. You can remove the filters by clicking here. Just remember to remove your filters, otherwise you might think that some photos are missing. And then it's just very simple just to turn on and off all of these filters and to combine them as you want. Just very simple, very intuitive. Best way to start working in a catalog, in my opinion. And then if you want to take things a little bit further, we have also another user collection that is really useful, which are the smart albums. So I'm just going to click here, I'm going to create smart album, and here we have different search criteria. All of these criteria we can use to automatically organize our files. So whenever a photo in our catalog is meeting these criteria, it will be added automatically to this album. So let's say, for example, I want to create an album where my color tag must be purple and the rating is equal to 5 stars. Equals 5 stars. Let's see if there is something like that. I hit OK. And of course I have to give it a name, so purple plus 5 stars. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's see. This is our smart album here, and this would be all of my photos with a purple tag plus 5 stars. Okay, this is just very, very nice way to organize our work. Very fast. It's a really great way to organize our workflow in a catalog, and we can use any criteria that we like. And for example, I wanted to show you this one, processed. I'm going to call it, and we can just select the criteria that processed is true, and that would show us automatically all the photos within this catalog that once were processed. You have many ways to use this tool, and you can just be creative, play around with the criteria that match your needs, and just go ahead and use it. Something that you need to keep in mind, and it's very important when you're working with catalogs, is that as the raw files are not stored in the same place that the adjustments as it's happening with the sessions, it's important that once you have selected where your raw files should stay, that they stay in the same place. Because otherwise Capture One will lose the source file and then the files will appear like offline. Let's see the example. I'm going back to my 2020 catalog. I don't want to back this up. Okay, here I got, this is the new catalog that I just created before, and here I've got my files. And this is handy here, okay? And I have here my original source files. What happens if I would take this and move it somewhere else to some other location? You can see that we have some warning that appear here that this file is offline. And this means that Capture One lost the source of the original file. We can still edit it with most of the tools, as you can see. And the preview is updated because we are working here only with a preview, but we won't be able to process it. So for example, if I wanted to process it now, we would see an error, could not process the file because it's offline and Capture One doesn't have this information. So what can we do when we have a file that is offline? We can just right click and say locate, and then we can go to the original source of the file, which is right here, okay? And then the warning will go off. So there is a second way to do this, and for example, let's just take this other file, let's just put it here, and also is now appearing as offline. The second option to locate the files is just to put them back wherever they were. So for example here, and you can see that the warning has disappeared and this is back here, and if we wanted to process this file and this file, we will be able to do it. Just for you to keep in mind, I recommend you to not mess this up so much and just make sure that you are importing your raw files precisely where they need to be. So this would be it about the catalog organization. I know that there is a lot of information and I'm still leaving things out, but I think it's a nice introduction for you to get started and start to test out some of the options. Let's move on to how to do some batch editing, which is another of the questions that I get many times. And in order to do this, I'm going to jump here to my tools. I'm going to use exactly these files. I'm going to select them all and reset. I want to reset all of the adjustments, and voila, this is our actual raw files without any adjustments. There are different ways to do batch editing in Capture One. We can work with styles or presets, but there is also a very simple way to get started to do batch editing, which is my favorite because it's so useful and it can be applied anywhere. So I have here 5 different landscapes, and let's say that I want to edit this in a very fast way. So I would just select one of these, for example, this one that I have already selected, and do like a very generic edit, as generic as possible, and then I will just copy and paste these settings to the rest of the photos. In order to do this, there are some tools that are going to be really helpful for us and we can consider them our friends. For example, layers with the opacity control when we are working for all of the image with fill layers, it's going to be really useful because then we can fine tune all of the images just by putting up and down the opacity slider. That's really useful. We can use, for example, the Luma Range tool, the Luma Curve, the basic color editor, or the color balance, which are very generic tools affecting the image in a very generic way. And that's going to be useful for us. So let's do a very quick edit here. I'm going to create a new fill adjustment layer. As always, I'm going to call it background. And I'm just going to do something really simple here. Let's just do some highlight recovery, shadow recovery. I'm going to add some contrast. Actually, as this is a landscape, I will use the RGB curve instead of the Luma curve, because in this case, being a landscape, we want to always saturate it a bit, throw some interest into these colors, and the RGB curve is going to do this automatically. So I think that can work. Just a bit of contrast. As you can imagine, we don't want to go so far on the contrast because this edit needs to be good also for the rest of the photos. Also, what works many times is to just throw in a bit of clarity. We can use a natural on punch mode. I think punch mode will work as we are doing landscapes today. We also need to keep in mind what kind of images we are doing. In this case, I'm using tools that always are good for landscape images. So, for example, this will be something really generic. Let's see the before and after. Not much of a difference, but already did something. Let's try to work a bit more with this sky. So I'm going to create a new fill adjustment layer. I'm going to call it sky. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to work with the Luma Range tool. The Luma Range tool is great to do batch editing because you can apply complicated masks from one picture to the other, and it will adapt according to the luminosity of the pixel and not to the actual position of the pixel in the image. It might seem confusing just when said like that, but you're going to see in a moment that it's really simple. So I'm going to select the most luminous part of the image, the brightest part of the image, and I'm trying to work on that. We can adjust the Luma range here and we can create some nice fall off, so the transition won't be too aggressive. We can also increase the radius. Let's do something like there because we want to have a very, very smooth mask. Okay, I think that would be close enough. Okay, I think that would be really nice. So I can work separately with this part of the image. So I'm going to click apply. And normally in landscapes, the brightest part of the image is the sky, or should be the sky normally. So I can just work this separately. So let's just reduce a bit the exposure, just a bit. Let's bring up some more highlights here. We don't want to go too far in this, but fortunately we have the opacity slider. And we can, for example, increase the blue channel a bit, just like this. So that will be a very nice bright blue sky. And to finish with this edit, I'm just going to throw another fill layer. I'm going to call it color, and I will do just a very, very simple color balance adjustment. And what works many times, as you know, cool shadows, warm highlights. That should be quite it. Maybe it's just a bit too saturated, so I will just reduce the saturation a bit from the slider. Okay, something like that would be acceptable. We don't want to go into a very crazy edit here. We just want to do something very generic that would work for the rest of the images. So this is the before, this is the after. You can see that I think we managed to create here some atmosphere. So I'm just going to copy these adjustments. We can also have the keyboard shortcut, Command-Shift-C or Control for Windows, and that would copy our adjustments. And I'm going to select the rest of the images just by clicking one and holding Shift and clicking the last one. I can select all of them and I can just apply the same adjustments. Okay, and there we are. Let's see what happens. We probably need to do some fine tuning, but I think it worked quite well. Let's see the before and after here. I think this is quite nice. We probably are lacking here some contrast, but right now it's just more simple because we can just increase the contrast here a bit and maybe just the exposure a bit. And I think that would be it really for this photo. If we wanted to do a very quick edit, that would be nice up to. That would be nice too. Let's see before and after. Okay. And this is probably a bit underexposed, but we can just take the exposure up like this. Maybe recover just a bit more of the shadows. And that would be it basically. And just in a very quick way, we can have all of our pictures edited. I think this looks quite nice, in fact. Maybe just a bit more up of the exposure. And there we go. So let's take a look at what the Luma mask is doing. I'm going to press M on this layer and just see what happens here. The mask adapted itself to the parameters of brightness of the sky here, and also here, if we select this mask, we can see that it's almost not affecting anything because we didn't have this range of luminosity here. But for example, here it is actually doing something. Let's see, for example, the before and after of this. it's adding some blue information there because we played around with our curves. If we want to have it a bit not so obvious, we can just reduce the opacity of the layer, and you get the whole idea of this. It's really nice because you can just be very precise in what you're doing without losing so much time on it. We could of course also work with presets. I have many presets from the color balance tool, and if I wanted to save this preset from the color balance tool, just the warm highlights and the cool shadows, we can just do this in a very simple way just by selecting the option Save User Preset and give it a name like Cool Shadows Warm Highlights, and then it would appear anywhere here with the rest of my presets, and then we could add them to any other photo within our catalog or within any of our Capture One files. If you're interested that we go further any other day into the batch editing, you can just post it down in the comments and I will take a look at your suggestions, and I can just use these ideas to create new Capture One sessions if that would be something that interests you. So we're getting on to the end of this webinar, and there is just one last thing that I wanted to show you. And I think that you can really take advantage of it, which is the workflow automation for exporting. So now I finished to edit this batch of photos. It could be applied to, of course, bigger batches of photos, as I'm sure that you're already doing. But let's just say that I wanted to keep it fast and not to use to import and export for so long, so I just used these 5 files here. And I also want to export them all, so I'm going to select all of these files by clicking Command A or Control A for Windows. And I'm moving on to my output recipes, my process recipes, which are here. So we have here different process recipes that come with Capture One. Remember that process recipes are just exporting presets that can give you the control over a set of settings that you can do, and just apply them as many as you want to, as many photos as you want. And this can really keep things fast already, but there is some other things that you can't do in order to be extra fast, which is, for example, just to create your own recipes. For example, I created this recipe here, my PSD recipe, for 8 bits, Adobe RGB, 100% size, and I can even set it to open up in Photoshop right after that. For today, I'm going to select None because I don't want Photoshop to open up. And I created also a subfolder here. This I did on the first day, if you remember, but there is just an even better way to do this. So we have here 3 little dots, and if we click on them, we can see this dialog box opening up, and this is the process recipe subfolder tokens. What the tokens actually are is just automated ways to put your information into the folders or into the... It works in the same way for capture naming, import naming, output naming. You can find these customization tokens in many tools in Capture One, and once you've mastered them, it's really useful. So for example, instead of just writing manually PSD, I'm going to select the process recipe token. It's here, recipe name, so I'm just going to drag it here, and you can see the sample of how it would look like. In this case, it's just doing exactly the same, but it's useful because you can just do this for all of the recipes, and you don't need to bother to do that manually. So you would get here the name TIFF and Adobe RGB, 8 bits, whatever. And for example, let's say also some JPEG full size. Just going to click here, and the same way I'm just going to choose the recipe name. There we are, and that would create different files for us. Even one more we can do, I think it's not worth it. So I can export JPEG, TIFFs and PSD all together, and they're going to go all to different folders. And this is going to be very useful to keep our files at hand. We could even use some different criteria, like for example here, in the general output location, I set this to the desktop just to keep things at hand. Normally I would do it on my external hard drive as I do everything else, but we can even use some other tokens to make things a bit more organized. So for example, let's choose the image date, for example, and let's see where that is going. Okay, I can even change the format here. Let's just say year, month, day, as I'm normally working with in this kind of format of the date. And if I just go ahead and click process, yeah, okay, this is something that happens sometimes. The selected recipe will not be used because it is not enabled. This is not so intuitive, I must give you that, but it's just what it's trying to tell me is that I selected this recipe, like selected, and I have to be an orange selection for any of the ones that I ticked. Okay, so I can just click process now. And what Capture One is going to do is it's going to send my output files to the desktop. It will be the output folder we were working on a session, to a subfolder according to each one of the date of these images. And in each of these folders, it's going to create another folder with the recipe name. Okay, so we're going to have created some set of folders here. You can see that it went really fast. And I'm just going to go back to my Finder. Sorry, I always mess this up. So my desktop here, and we've got here different recipes were created. So 2017, 14th of August, I have here my JPEG, my PSD file, and my TIFF. Same thing goes for all of these other folder dates. I just use this one, but you can see here how many actually you have. You have so many options to customize this. And as I said, this is the same kind of tokens for import naming, capture naming. It's just very crazy the amount of automation that you can do here. This is just one example. I suggest that you take a look at this and find out what works for you. So that was actually all for today. I'm going to come back to you on this little screen. Thank you all for watching. I hope it was useful. I know it was a lot of information today, but there is just so much to say about workflow in Capture One because there is just so many options, so many things that you can do. And what I really love about this software is that it really adapts to the way you work and not the other way around. So you don't need to do all of these advanced techniques from the beginning. You can just, if you're beginner, start with star rating, color tags, using some filters, and that will just work for you. Just keep it to what is good for you, good for what you are doing for your work, and you should be fine. If you want to try it out, just let me remind you that there is a 30 days free trial that you can download from capture1.com. And when you decide to buy your license, you can do that at WEX website, and I'm sure that they will be very happy when you do that. And I'm sure that you will be happy to know too that there is a summer promotion going on with 25% discount in Capture One Pro, Pro Sony and Pro Nikon, and even a 30% discount on Pro Fujifilm, so lucky Fujifilm users out there can get a nice deal this summer. So that was all. I hope to see you soon in the next Capture One webinar, and don't leave just yet because remember that I'm around to answer your questions. I'm going to leave now 15 minutes to answer these questions that you might have. And thank you all for watching. Thanks to Wex and to Matt for being around on the chat to answer the questions. And I hope to see you soon in the next Capture One webinar. Bye.